Well, please keep that open in front of you, page 1081. There'll be a massive help to me as we look at that together. And the other evening, Dawn and I sat down to watch a film. Happens sometimes. And we saw The Life List. It's one of those films made for Netflix. And the plot is quite simple. A mother's died of cancer, but she makes a series of videos for her daughter. And they're videos about how much she loves her daughter, and a video saying a few things that she would like her daughter to do before receiving her inheritance, and that she's used the last few days of her life to pass on what she most wanted her daughter to know. And in this part of the Bible that we're looking at over the summer, Jesus is leaving his disciples. It's Thursday night, and the atmosphere has been tense in the upper room. He's washed the disciples' feet. Judas has slipped out to betray him already, and within 24 hours, Jesus is going to be dead. He's just got a few hours to teach his disciples before they come and arrest him. And so how does Jesus use those few hours to pass on what he most wants his disciples to know? He wants them to know that he loves them, and he has some things that he wants them to do before they receive their final inheritance, which is being with Jesus forever, you see. And it's a kind of life list in John 14:17. It's like a life list. How Jesus wants us to live in real life now that he's gone to the cross and shown his great love for us in that way. How does he want us to live from day to day? That's an important question, isn't it? Real life Jesus, yeah? In the messiness of life, when we struggle, when we let him down, what then? And we're looking at this first section of these few chapters in John's Gospel, and there is comfort here. Let me tell you, there is comfort here for people who've let Jesus down. There's great comfort, and I want us to enjoy that today. That's what we're going to be seeing today, and we're beginning in chapter 13, verses 31 to 32. So if you've got those in front of you, then have a look at that. Chapter 13, verses 31 and 32. Let me read those out just as we begin. When he was gone, Jesus said, "Now the Son of Man is glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will glorify the Son in himself and will glorify him at once." Jesus is teaching about his glory. The sort of glory that a footballer might have when they score a winning penalty for the England women's game. That sort of standing in front of the stands, arms up, receiving the adulation of all the crowds. Jesus has great glory. He shares that glory with God the Father. Can you imagine sharing glory with God himself? The kind of glory that Jesus had when he made the world. That's what it says in John chapter 1. It says he came full of glory. Now, the sort of glory that Jesus has when he turns water into wine. In chapter 2 of John's Gospel, do you know what it says there? It says, "This was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory." Can you imagine that kind of glory? Or the kind of glory that Jesus has when he raises Lazarus from the dead. Back in chapter 11 in John's Gospel, Jesus says, do you remember, "Lazarus come out," and Lazarus walks out of the grave. Someone once said that he had to say, "Lazarus walk out," Lazarus come out, otherwise everyone would have come out of the grave. He had to specify one person. Such is Jesus' glory. And this is what it says in John chapter 11. It says, "It is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it." Jesus raises Lazarus to show his glory. Now, let me ask you this for a second. If you had all the glory of God, then what would you do with that? If you had all the resources of God's glory at your disposal, how would you put that to work? What do you think? I mean, if I could turn water into wine, then I'm going to start creating shopping in my fridge. That's going to save me a lot of time, isn't it? All that sort of going down to Asda. Can you imagine how much time you're going to save doing that? Or if I can deal with sickness, I'm going to make sure that I never get ill. Coughs, colds, goodbye. No more of that anymore. If I can create the world, I'm going on holiday to the best bits. I made them, and so I should enjoy them. That's fair enough, isn't it? Do you want to know how Jesus uses his glory? He dies in agony. That's how he uses his glory. So at this point in John's Gospel, Judas has gone out into the night. You see that in chapter 13, verse 30. He's gone out with one purpose, and that's to betray Jesus, and it says that it's night. It's dark. And soon, at once it says in verse 32, it's going to lead to Jesus' arrest and then a false trial, and then he's going to be strung up to suffocate and die on the cross on a piece of wood that the Romans have put there for that express purpose. And what does Jesus say about that? Now is the time for me to be glorified. Isn't that strange? That is his moment of maximum glory when he ends his life being tortured to death by the Romans. Such a sort of strange thing for us to get into our heads, that Jesus is most glorified when we teach about the cross. That's what we need to learn in church, and that's what we need to learn as Christians. You know, we think sometimes that Jesus would be most glorified if there were amazing miracles in our church. If we had incredible buildings, if we wore amazing outfits, we had large crowds of people, if we had an incredible band and the singing just sort of carried you away. You know, we had bishops, archdeacons, and cardinals. Now that would be something. But Jesus says, my moment of maximum glory is when I die on a simple wooden cross. And if you want to glorify me, talk about that. You know, the church in history has stumbled when it's drifted away from that truth, when it's assumed that Jesus is most glorified by something that looks incredibly impressive. When Jesus himself says that a simple death on a wooden cross is the most glorious thing of all. Yeah? Do you agree? Now, in some sense, that makes no sense at all, does it? I mean, it's just humiliating. It's just a defeat. And the reason why it is such a moment of glory comes in the next section. So let's have a look at that, verses 34 and 35. See what that can help us understand. Let me read out those verses. Jesus goes on to say, "A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." Can you see this is Jesus' sort of commentary on why his death might be a moment of incredible glory? Because it's an act of supreme love. And Jesus says, love one another. Now, he calls this a new command. You might think that's slightly strange. I sometimes think that's slightly strange. The Bible's full of love. It tells you all the way through. Right from the beginning, you've got to love one another. That doesn't feel like news in lots of ways. Leviticus 19:18 says this, famously, love your neighbour as yourself. That was quite a few pages previously. So in what sense is this new? That's the question. And here's the answer. Jesus has just cranks up the level. Jesus' greatest glory is to hold nothing whatever back, but to give his life for us. So when he says love, he means love like that. You see, love holding nothing back, costly love, uncomfortable love, painful love. Dawn and I sometimes have the opportunity to prepare people for marriage, and we have young couples come see us, and we have dinner with them. In fact, I've got a couple here who've been through that experience. But something that we often say, Kevin and Sabrina, I hope we said this to you, but we often say this, is that when you start to think to yourself, this love for my marriage partner is really starting to get in the way of a lot of things for me. This is starting to cost me really quite a lot. Then you've got it about right. Okay? You've got it about right. In a sense, true love hurts. Because you're giving up yourself. Yeah? You're giving of yourself. What would you say was a good thing to give to someone to show that you love them? Sometimes you might buy a bunch of flowers, quite nice flowers down at Tesco, £5.95 for a bunch of chrysanthemums. It's a good start. Perhaps you want to ramp it up. A box of chocolates. Ferrero Rocher, one of those big sort of gold trays of, that should do it. A cake that you've made. Maybe invest some of yourself in it. You don't just want to buy it off the shelf. No, I've made this cake myself, and it's for you. When Dawn and I were going out, I made her a chocolate cake. It was so inedible that she gave it to a friend of hers who played in the rugby team, who was notorious for eating anything. He couldn't finish his slice. How do you show someone that you love them? Would you give your life? Would you give your life for them? Jesus is going to go to the cross. Verse 33, my children, talking to the disciples, I'll be with you only a little longer. You will look for me, and just as I told the Jews, so I tell you now, where I am going, you cannot come, at least for the time being. At least for the time being. And now that Jesus has gone to heaven, and we're still waiting to be able to join him there, then this costly love is what sets us apart as Christians. Yeah? This is what people are to feel when they meet us as a church, or they meet us as Christians, that we have this love. Maybe this is part of how you came to faith. It is for me. I saw in Christians a kind of love that I knew I didn't have, and I wanted it. Christian love is the way that people will know that we're Jesus' disciples. This is what makes us different. We'll make sacrifices for one another. Now, perhaps if we're Christians, we've sort of got too used to that. Maybe we've come to expect that. We don't notice that any longer. And we think that loving relationships are just normal. But believe me, they're not. They are not. I know that Christians don't always get this right. And I know that there are bound to be people here who've been let down by Christians in the past. And if so, I'm really, really sorry. But often the kinds of sacrifices that people will make for each other are highly unusual in our culture. Highly unusual. Christians will open their homes. Let's notice this. They open their homes, they give you money, they listen to you, they share what they've got, they forgive you. I saw a friend this week who I'd hurt terribly in the past. I just made a really rash offhand comment that hurt him to the core. And I went to him and I said sorry, and he just forgave me. That's what Christians do in a way that doesn't happen in other places. I don't know whether you've ever been part of a work team, or maybe a family isn't Christian. This doesn't happen in other places. And people used to notice that in the early church. You know what they used to say about the first Christians? See how they love one another. That's what people noticed about Christians in the second century. Christian love is the way that people will know that we are his disciples. It's that sort of trademark characteristic of a Christian person: deliberate, sacrificial love. And so we want people to see that. If you invite your non-Christian friend along to church, we want them to see us relating to one another out of love. Do you know, it's just a very small thing, but that's the reason why we have two people leading our services. Do you notice that? Because we want people to see that we have love and respect for one another as we lead the service together. Maybe if you're having a dinner party around, maybe that's not what you do, but if you invite people around to your house for a barbecue or whatever, it's easy to have a sort of invisible wall between your Christian friends and your not yet Christian friends. And you have a sort of a church event and then a non-church event. Perhaps if we can mix those two, then people will see Christians loving each other, and that will speak of the gospel. Do you think we could do that? It's the power of Christian community, Christian love in action. So Jesus' glory is to die on the cross so that we would learn how distinctive his love is. But that's not all. Let's carry on looking at this part of the Bible. Two more things to find out. Why is it so loving that Jesus should die for us? Because there's a sort of swap that goes on between us and him. So have a look at verse 37. This is the title, Jesus' swap humbles us. And that's the next bit. But have a look at verse 37 particularly. This is what Peter says there. Peter's got a question. And he says, Lord, why can't I follow you now? I will lay down my life for you. Now literally, that means something like this. I will lay down my life in your place. I will swap my life for yours. Now, why that doesn't quite make sense is that Jesus has said quite the opposite in the early part of John's Gospel. John 6:51, he says this. This is Jesus speaking now. I'm the living bread that came down from heaven. Whoever eats this bread, he's talking about his body, will live forever. This bread is my flesh, which I will give for the life of the world. You know, Jesus is going to give his life in place of the life of the world. It's a swap. He's going to give his life so that the world can get their life back. Yeah? Or he's explained it a different way in John chapter 10, verse 11. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. You see, it's a life given for a life saved. You sacrifice one life, and then you get many lives back. And Peter's question is the first of four questions that the disciples ask in this part of the Bible. Peter's question is saying, why can't I lay down my life to save yours? And Jesus is saying, you can't. You won't even make it to the end of tomorrow. I need to die for you. I need to give my life to save your life. It doesn't work the other way around. And that's a humbling thing to accept. Perhaps you want to do great things for Jesus. Perhaps we feel that have you ever thought this? That God's quite lucky to have someone as cool as me on their side. I mean, obviously I wouldn't think that, but you might. But perhaps we feel that between us we can build God's church in Ponders End. But first, we need to let Jesus die for us. Yeah, these aren't bad things. But first we need to admit our need for Jesus. Can you see how that cuts against our pride, how it brings us down to size? A life given, his, for many lives saved, ours. We've got to gratefully accept Jesus' death on our behalf. Let him do what we can't do, so that then we can serve him with the lives that he's given back to us. Yeah? But in that is a great reassurance. This is our last point. Jesus' reassurance comforts us. It's the last point from chapter 14, verse 1 to 4. Let me read that out again. It's a while since we had it read. Do not let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. My Father's house has many rooms. If that were not so, would I have told you that I'm going there to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am. You know the way to the place where I'm going. Jesus is leaving his disciples, right? It's Thursday night, and the atmosphere has been tense in the upper room. He's washed the disciples' feet. Judas has slipped out to betray him, and within 24 hours, Jesus will be dead. He's just got a few hours left to teach his disciples. And Jesus is telling his disciples not to be troubled or upset. Perhaps you're thinking, well, of course they'll be upset. But what Jesus is saying is connected with what's just happened, you see. I know that we've gone from chapter 13 to 14. There's that big sort of 14 in the Bible. That was put in by an archbishop in the 13th century. He's got a lot to answer for. Okay, but really, the end of chapter 13 connects very, very closely with the beginning of chapter 14. Jesus is saying, don't let your hearts be troubled. You won't completely fail me. Can you see that? Jesus has just said, look, Peter, you're going to let me down, but don't let your heart be troubled. One day, end of verse 36, you will follow me. I will come back and take you to be with me in heaven. Can you see that? Can you feel that? And Jesus is saying, at times you'll fail me and you'll let me down and you'll deny me and you'll pretend that I don't exist. All kinds of things. And I'm as much guilty as those things as Peter ever was. But your sin won't take you down. And how do we know that? Because, verse 3, Jesus is going to prepare a place for them. Now, I don't know, I think I had all kinds of strange images in my head when I was a kid and I read the Bible. I sort of imagined Jesus sort of hoovering the carpet and just turning down the bedspread, whatever it is. What Jesus means by preparing a place for us is that he's going to the cross. He's going to die to make that place available. And he goes on that bitter journey and he says at the end of John's Gospel, it is finished. In other words, I prepared many rooms. In other words, the space won't run out. The space won't run out. Each failed disciple, verse 3, you see that? Each failed disciple will be taken personally by Jesus to be with him for eternity. And you think, but how can a failed disciple like you or like me be guaranteed a place in Jesus' house, in the Father's house? And the answer is through the cross, through his death, through his sacrifice. And that is the way to the place where Jesus has gone. That is what prepares a room for each one of us. Verse 1, if we believe in God and we believe also in Jesus, then our sin will not take us down. The space won't run out. And that's the reassurance for everyone who follows Jesus. And so can you see Jesus is speaking to people who've blown it? And he says, the moment of greatest glory was when I was strung up on a cross to die for you. And at that point, I showed you what sacrificial love looks like in real life. And I needed to give up my life for you because a life had to be given for a life to be saved. But when you've allowed that to humble you, to cut against your pride, and when you come to me, says Jesus, empty-handed and say that you believe in me, then even failed disciples can find a place in my Father's house forever. That's real life Jesus. That's his promise to you and me. And we're going to pray it in. Let's pray, shall we? You know the way to the place where I'm going, says Jesus Christ. Thank you, Lord Jesus, that you came, you were glorified as you died on the cross, because that was such a clear example of sacrificial love, and that your life was being given so that our life could be saved. And that means that even failed and failing people can come back to you. It's all paid if we believe in you. And so our sin won't take us down, and there will be enough rooms for every single one of us. And so I pray, Father, that we would trust Jesus when he says that to us. Thank you that he took the time on the night where he was going to be beaten and flogged and have a false trial. And that he took the time to speak to his disciples and comfort them and reassure them. And I pray that 2,000 years later we would feel that reassurance and that comfort in his name. And we pray through Jesus. Amen.